I'll talk from a very practical standpoint as a consultant. I'm really not a mathematician. I'm not a technically strong man. I am a company guy with executive experience. I worked for Eastman Kodak Company. Probably the younger people in the audience didn't roll a film in the camera, but I know most of the speakers did. So I worked for Eastman Kodak Company, a very good case of risk management. And I worked also for Embraer, which is a airplane manufacturer located in the city I live, São José dos Campos. It's actually the third airline manufacturer, airplane manufacturer in the world after Boeing and Airbus. And we are very proud of that. I worked there as director of risk and compliance. It was very, very interesting period of my life. But I've been working with quality in the beginning as a quality manager, and then I moved for risk and compliance. I love the subject, and I got specialized. Always wanted to write something, to write a book. And we had this big challenge here in Brazil, and that motivated me to write a book. It's only in Portuguese for a while. It's called Risco Não é um Número, which is risk is not a number, which it's very fits very well with the purpose of the webinar today. This is called the Dam of Brumadinho in Minas Gerais, Brazil. It's a very big former dam. There's now just a rumble of mud, and 250 people died in the accident. The damage to the environment is incalculable. Vale is the name of the company that has this dam. And it was an inactive dam, but with very many problems in the project and in the operation, and just collapsed in a few seconds. Most of the people died were from the company. And that motivated me, and that was the second dam failure for Vale, as it motivated me. So most of my book uses this as an example. This is an example of a huge failure of enterprise risk management. We talk a lot about ERM, but I really don't believe in ERM as it is proposed right now by all the standards and all the big consultancies. I just don't believe. I don't think it works. And that's an example right there on the screen. They had all the conditions necessary to assess, understand, make good decisions, and that was not done. So the risk owners are facing maybe some jail time. I don't know. I'm not very trusted on that. Brazil has a story of impunity of big fishes like those. That is applied to political world also. You know, all our former presidents have problems with justice, and none is facing jail time. And we have a cultural problem, which is much larger than just risk management, but affects risk management, which is we don't like to review uncertainty. We are macho people that we say, I can do it. I will do it in the time that you want, and no problems. And you know you're lying, but you take that as a given. And most of our board directors and managers go through life not in a technical path, so they're not math oriented. Very poor system thinking, and that's where I try to fill the gap. I think I can bring expertise and tools to system thinking. And still, we have low society sensitivity with a huge accident like that, and still our society is not very sensitive. Actually, that's a worldwide problem. Vale's stock is still valuable in New York Stock Exchange, so it didn't hurt them very much, unless if you're not taking into account that they're going to lose like $100 billion in fines and indemnizations. So that's kind of hurts. And we are losing our manufacturing competitiveness very, very quickly. We didn't have a vaccine. We're crying help for China to get vaccines, COVID vaccines for us. We didn't plan well enough. And Brazil is today breaking records in COVID deaths. Unfortunately, yesterday was a very sad day. We had 2,500 deaths registered for COVID. So there are big challenges. It's a very complex country. And sometimes it's fascinating, sometimes it's very frustrating. We keep moving forward. I believe in Brazil's resources. Agribusiness in Brazil is still growing. It's feeding the world right now with soy and corn and iron and other things, not just agri, but commodities mainly. But we build planes. So there is an executive plane from Brazil there in the screen with 500 planes already sold. That's where I work. And we are within the 10 largest GDP in the world. In the world, we were actually up to sixth place, and we are falling. Korea is going up, and Asia is going strong, of course. We'll be probably among the 10 largest countries by 2030 still, and that's mostly commodities growth. Okay, let's talk about business now. What I learned, what's my experience with risk management. And like I said, I don't believe too much in the way we're selling enterprise risk management around the world. I'm going to try to assess the problem here. And we have three levels of risk management. It's a Pareto analysis. Maybe it's not even 80-20, it's a 90-10. And the first level is where life happens day to day. And these risks should be or are managed by the first line management. That's the routine, that's the risks that are already analyzed. We don't need to interfere too much with that. They have clear tolerances. They know what's their contractual clauses, their budgets, and so on. So we don't need to interfere with that. And they can decide that their responsibility is to respond appropriately to the risk. And then we have a second level that really demands a coordinated response. That's where are the projects, where the changes, the big changes, strategic execution, that's where it lies. The number of risks, of course, is much smaller because in the first level have all the risks. Here you have to discuss tolerances. It's not the black and white. You have to calibrate for the object of interest, whether it's a project, whether it's another type of interest. And there is where you decide investment, insurance, continuity planning, contingencies in a company-wide approach. And then you have a first level, of course, where the risk is directly derived from strategy. You have like competition moves and so on, where the decision is already taken. And there is where you aggregate residual risk so that you have a proper capital and provisions. Like we already talked about this in the webinar. And it's a complex text to aggregate risks. Most people think that you just add impacts. That's not the case. It's a statistical maneuver. And the risk appetite then is determined by cost and benefit. That's where only I think the word risk appetite applies, because you're talking about going to a business, going out of a business, and things like this, and what are your values. I use risk tolerance like COSO or risk criteria like ISO, doesn't matter, for the other two levels. And I recommend that you do the same. Well, that's another pyramid. You may actually imagine what it is. This is the time that we spend as consultants, risk managers, compliance teams, and internal auditing. We devote a lot of time to the first level. That's the truth. That's where we are hired. That's where people feel comfortable because it's operational. So then they understand technical and process operations, and they go there and they spend their lives in the first level, and we don't actually have the value of the top of the pyramid and second level and first level. So as a consultant, I have this challenge. I'm trying to enter more and more and more into projects and business decisions, like we talked before, in bids and things like this. Why did this happen? I think it may be obvious, but let's check that. We have a risk management cycle. The tolerances come from two sides. One is strategic, where you have assumptions, and the other side is it's from policies. That's the normal operation of the company. We have codes of conduct, procedures, systems already automated, and they give a manager tolerance to work with. People know that, but they don't know in a conscious way. They just have this intuitively. And then you have inherent risk, which is a very dangerous word. I prefer to use natural uncertainties, but people talk about inherent risk. We have controls and mitigations already in place for that. And what we're calling risk management is the act of deciding if we have a residual risk, and we have to compare to tolerances. And most of the time, people are not very aware of the tolerances. And then you have residual risk. You ask yourself, is it material? You can do that in your brain. We do this all the time. And we go to the street when we buy something, we do all the time. Is there an exposure? Is that material for me? If it's material, it's got to go up. It's got to go to the second and third level. And we have to get data, like Anders just said, history, scenarios, indicators, a response proposal. And that has to go up for aggregation in some period of time, depending on the urgency, and be governed. The risk has to be watched in a corporate stance. And then you kind of regenerate the system. And that's the ideal world. The problem is, if it's not material, you have to assure the controls. You have to keep assuring the controls. And that's where we get lost. That's our swamp here, the labyrinth, the trap. As a consultant, I found myself many times in that trap, which is I'm spending my life assuring controls. I'm talking about processes that we know for 100 years, like accounts payable, and I'm still having to say that we shouldn't pay without proper approval. Come on, I don't want to do that. I want to go up. I want to go to strategy. Okay, so what can we do about it and not fall in the trap in the first place? Well, the first thing, you have to map objectives to assumptions and deploy. People do that for balanced scorecard and strategic execution, but they don't look at the risk side. That's the problem. We have to look at the risk side. And you have to review policies, because that's where your tolerances are going to come from. Forget about risk appetite statements. You have to review policies. Tolerances come from these two sides, as you remember. And here is things that you want to happen, and things that if they happen, you have to adapt the plan. So this is strategic conversation. And the other side is normal conversation. What's my limit for exposure? What are my unnegotiable values, like health and safety and things like that, and giving credit and so on? And what we consider normal performance, because risk management should not overlap with performance management. It should help and bind with performance management, but not overlap and cause a shadow and cause a fight, which is what we normally see. We're not here to look at normal performance. We're looking at things that can deviate materially from normal performance. That's the risk and compliance mission. Okay, at least as of course that's my opinion. So you can map assumptions, Actually, you can build a repository of typical assumptions for people to help assess their assumptions. When I teach assumptions, I use examples like Valley, which I just talked in yellow there. Kodak is a very nice case of customer value wrong assumption. Fukushima, which today completes 10 years, is a case of assumptions about events and assessment of vulnerability. Very bad assessment, actually, very bad planning. They had a very nice nuclear accident there, nuclear explosion. You can map your policies and you must review all the policies. If you don't have a policy, write the policy and check for the risk tolerance be quantified and specified. And you have all examples of policies that I normally review with people. And you're going to be amazed by how abstract and lacking tangibility that the policies have. And then you review your tolerance. You don't have to build a new table or whatever. And you have to review what you have and what's missing. And see if people understand which the tolerance that applies to their jobs, to their processes. Okay, you have to develop a materiality criteria, which is it gives origin to heat maps. And this is to be made simple, but not simplistic. I have here a Portuguese example. We're not talking about one probability and one impact. I work normally with 3 types of probabilities and a minimum of 6 impacts. There are some clients that work with 8 type of impacts, and they can all be automated in an application. And let's stop this thing of trying to monetize everything. We know that everything becomes money after some time, but when you talk about life and environmental damage, that's very difficult to do and people don't understand. So you work with qualitative expressions. And this is just to help people to do initial assessment. I also hate heat maps and risk registers. They are necessary in the initial assessment, and they are necessary for managers to decide what's material for the corporation, so we can go to the 2nd and 3rd level. And then you have to develop drop lists instead of letting people fill Excel spreadsheets. If you want them to do an assessment, if they want to use a spreadsheet, give taxonomy to them so they work easily in an agile form. It's not only for standardization, it's for things to move quickly. You make an initial assessment. Okay, this is an important risk. This is complex. I have to move 2nd level. That's what you want. This is an example of a drop list for controls. This type of control, design and planning control, like physical access restriction, concept proofing, workflow design. This is for a manager to use, not for a risk manager. It helps them to identify what are their controls and mitigations, their barriers, and what's the scope of the control. What's the scope I'm looking to? Is it a project? Is it a process? Is it a product? Okay, sorry. This is an example in Portuguese of a control self-assessment. I like control conformity scores. They help managers to assess the effectiveness, but you shouldn't spend too much time assuring those controls. You look at this example, internal auditing spends a lot of time in this company, for example, verifying controls. Most of their energy go into that. Okay, moving on, you have to train and educate a network of facilitator. The people are calling in financial industry 1.5 line between the 1st line of management and 2nd line of management. I like the concept, but I really like is that you're training facilitators to help managers. And then you have to educate management board directors so they understand what's a risk tolerance, why do you have levels, what is a level of complexity, and mainly do not get fooled when you are presented the risk analysis, and question the risk analysis, and begin to say, I want a sensitivity analysis better made. I want a simulation. I want a decision tree, whatever is the tool that you think is appropriate. But they have to understand what tool should be used for that type of risk. That's why I educate. That's where I spend time educating mainly top-level management and board directors. That's an example from Pelican, from Volvo Software. That's a bow tie. I teach system thinking using bow ties. People like that very much as a tool and as a teaching aid. They come to understand the complexity of risk when you have many factors, many drivers, and many consequences and mitigations. They understand why the probability overlaps one with each other. And I've been using this very successfully as an educational device. Okay. If something I want you to get out of this webinar, mainly if you're starting a program, is don't try to map all risk. Don't even start to map risk. Don't send spreadsheets to people and say you must fill this in 1 month and return with all the risks that you have, because that's insane. Think Pareto. We have to get 80% of the value and not 80% of the risks. So this is completely wrong approach. Use their knowledge, explain. If they feel comfortable with the controls and with the risks, let them live with their responsibility, and let's move to the second level. And single point estimates, I want to talk about that. I think most speakers will talk a little bit about how they hate also single point estimates, but let me try to you need to start with a single point estimate, even if it's in your brain, because you're always thinking, well, this is well controlled, and this is not too material, and this is solid as a rock. This is not. This is complex. This is a lot of interrelations. So let's focus on complex risks and material risks, risks that damage the reputation, or where you lose life, or where you have an environmental damage. So this is an example of single point estimate from the dam that collapsed. You see that the critical failure was in the top risks. This is actually from the judicial system in Brazil. They got that as an example that management knew this risk was important. The problem is they were using a number in the yellow range here, 30, because the probability is so low that you even bother about it. So that's the mistake here. Okay, this is single point estimate. The long tail is so long that, you know, if you worry about everything, you know, well, that's the problem. It collapsed not much after this assessment. Okay. What happens is probability is a function and not a single number. You have to. How do you do single point estimate in a probability and impact analysis? There's a risk there. That's the shape of a risk. Risk is not a number. Risk is a shape. It's a distribution, and it's linked to a system that's more complex than just the distribution. The distribution is linked to other distributions. So what happens? Where do you select your single point estimate? You must be crazy to try. Okay. Well, managers have to understand the difference. They have a common risk compared to material and complex risk, and you have to understand you need different tools, maybe, or the tools grow as you grow with complexity and materiality. So if you have few risk drivers and you're not violating any criteria, you can do what normally people do: control self-assessment and cost and benefit analysis. You don't need internal auditing to help you to assess control. Do it yourself. Okay. Then if you go up in materiality, you may throw there a sensitivity analysis, a simple sensitivity analysis for outputs, like a dollar influence or interest rates or whatever. And you may start using decision trees. They are pretty simple, Bayesian type of thinking that you can throw there. And you can do, and then you go up, and people are going to talk about this during the webinar, of course. And that's the meat. That's where you get the value here. Okay, 80% of the value, 20%, maybe less than of the risks. Things to keep in mind: the risk is not a number; it's a distribution connected system. Homo sapiens is not very good. And I think Doug Hubbard is going to talk about that for sure. Homo sapiens doesn't assess uncertainty of his assessment of uncertainty, his or her assessment of uncertainty. We are very proud of our assessments. That's the problem, and we get stuck to them. And all risk analyses are subjective because you have assumptions all the time. Some are useful, and I'm paraphrasing the old adage from George Box. So keep that in mind, and that's the three things you have to extract out of my presentation from my experience. Okay. Thank you very much. I think we are on time here. 1 minute.
Indeed we are. Indeed we are, Marco. Thank you
Okay.
very much. Extremely nice, extremely helpful, because you really hit the nail on the head when you say that risk is not a number.
Yes. The title is
Risk,
very successful.
yeah, I can, and this is something that we all need to address. Risk
Yes.
is not a number,
It's a
but
distribution connected to a
but then
system of
but then you have
distribution.
so many questions that you ask, and one of the most important questions I thought you asked was, what is it? Is it a project? Is it a product? Is it a process? What is it? So all of this really helps to materialize what you have been saying. Uh, we have now to break for about 15 minutes. Let me see if there is a question. There is a question about IT tools, but we will take that at the very end. We don't recommend any particular tool, but since there is a question, we will address that question, and we'll
Yes,
see
I'll be here. I'll be here.
what the panelists or what the speakers they have to say. But anyway,
Okay.
it's so exciting to hear all of these nice experts that we don't. This is one of the few times that we don't want to take a coffee break. But on the other hand, with the presentation from Sao Paulo and the coffee in Brazil and so on, it probably gives us the appetite to have a cup of coffee and then refresh ourselves. My lady, are you back? Or are you still? No. Okay. Anyway, we will break now for 12 minutes, and we will be back at 2:30, where we will then continue with the final sessions. So